Okay, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. My name is Alexander Pedikov. I'm your host. Just a couple little announcements before we bring our guest in. If you haven't checked out some of the previous shows, you can go on the channel and check out other live broadcasts we've done. We had Seth Breedlove on last week. We have Les Odell of West Virginia coming in next week, so that'll be exciting. Check out my website, Pedikov Media, if you want to check out Lions of the East, my new documentary that's about mountain lions and mystery big cats in New England. That was just released right in March as the whole pandemic situation sort of began. So if you want to check that out, just go to my website. And lastly, with the description down below, we have the Chasing Legends stuff. That's a show that I'm teaming up with Nash Hoover and his crew, and we're going to be traveling around to different parts of America, hopefully when things are more calmed down, and we'll be launching a Kickstarter for that on May 31st. We already have a couple episodes planned and one that's almost kind of ready to go, so stay tuned for that. And without getting too much into the details here, we'll just do a quick intro on Sean. So Sean, the Forkchop Forker, is a Bigfoot investigator and radio personality. In 2004, he joined the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, now known as the Keystone Bigfoot Project, and started investigating reports and sightings that were taking place in Pennsylvania. Branching out from Pennsylvania, Forker founded the American Bigfoot Society in 2011. He was the president of that. And he continues his research in Pennsylvania today, mostly in northern Pennsylvania. He also has a show called The Sasquatch Experience with co-host Henry May that was started in 2005. So we're talking that show had some longevity, absolutely. And they relaunched this past January after nearly 10-year hiatus. But on the show, they covered all sorts of topics, including the 2008 Georgia Bigfoot hoax, which made big news, and M.K. Davis's Bluff Creek massacre theory, which is now resurfaced again. So without further ado, let's bring in Sean Forker. How you doing, Sean?
Hey, Alex. Great to be here. I'm doing great.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I'm really excited
My
to
pleasure.
have you on and talk about Pennsylvania Bigfoot, all the other stuff. And we obviously have something in common with Pennsylvania. We've both investigated a strange location out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But without, getting into that first, let's say, do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of got you interested in this subject, into the Bigfoot or the unknown?
Oh, absolutely. So I grew up in a family where it was openly discussed, paranormal things. My dad it still is to this day, a huge buff of paranormal, Amityville. I remember growing up watching shows like In Search of and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, Ancient Mysteries, and of course, Unsolved Mysteries, right? I remember, hiding in my room on Sunday nights and hearing that music and pulling the covers up over my face. It was horrifying, right? But it turned out to be great shows. And they really kind of kept the fire going for me. When I was 9, my dad gave me the book Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us, and I was hooked.
Classic.
It's a heavy book for a 9-year-old to read, but I understood most of it, and it just fascinated with me that the thought that there's still this gigantic ape-like creature that could potentially be living in the forests of North America. So in the spirit of that, libraries were still full of books back then. They didn't have a lot of computers in them. I'm kind of I got the internet in high school, so I'm kind of in the intermediary generation, right? I didn't grow up with it until later. So then I found the World Wide Web, found the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and joined up with them and realized that Pennsylvania in itself has a whole plethora of sightings. It's one of the more active sightings of active states with sightings in the United States. Like it's amazing that all this was around me, and I wanted to be a part of investigating it. So I met a guy named Eric Altman, who kind of became my mentor and still is my mentor. And that's where it kind of all began. I got hooked by a book, and I never left.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I feel like so many people get into this subject either because they have an interest, like you or I, that's more of where it came from, or they've had an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Eric's fantastic. I'm hoping to have him on the program as well. So recently, I think just as of this summer, there was this big sort of news hubbub about Pennsylvania being one of the top states in the United States for Bigfoot sightings. I wanted to get your take on that. Obviously, everyone's heard about California, Washington,
Mhm.
Oregon, Ohio being sort of the top dogs. Pennsylvania's been up there for a while, and I think some of the more interesting encounters do come from Pennsylvania. But I guess they were looking at new data, or they just put out something that said Pennsylvania was one of the top. I mean, I was curious to hear what you had to say about that.
I don't want to throw shade at my Ohio friends, but I still think Pennsylvania has more sightings than Ohio. We'll have to look at various databases for that. Ohio's got a lot of BFRO, Don Keating, Ron Schaffner, those guys. But Pennsylvania, you've got a lot of organizations. You got Stan Gordon,
Of
you had
course.
Dr. Paul Johnson and Joan Jeffers, even at that time, who kind of ran their own thing. The Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society. Steve Anderson was one of the founders of that group, and then Eric Altman took over in 2000. So you got a lot of different areas to pull research from, aside from the BFRO stuff I've collected. Many other independent researchers have collected. So there's a lot of data that those people probably didn't even count because I know they didn't get my stuff. So yeah, I think Pennsylvania's got a lot. And of course, if you lived here and you've been investigating, you've always known we've had a lot of sightings. The problem with Pennsylvania, I think, is it has a perception problem. When you think of Pennsylvania, you think of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh,
Exactly.
and not the hundreds of thousands of square miles in between, right? That makes up the majority of the state. And where I live, it's very rural. There's woods everywhere. I could go outside and show everywhere around me. I live in the river valley, surrounded by forests. Um, if I go 10 minutes north of me, I'm deep in the woods. If I go 10 minutes south of me, I'm deep in the woods. So uh, Pennsylvania, and especially the areas I investigate, the areas you've been to yourself, they're very deeply forested areas. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that something could either live in Pennsylvania undetected year round, or they could possibly use it as a go through or a thorough through to other areas of the country and escape detection. So much wilderness here. And then the other problem with Pennsylvania, not to keep going on without breathing, is that there's a lot of private land. So aside from public land, there's a lot of private land you need to have permission to get on, because folks around here don't like trespassers and they'll probably shoot you.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. You sort of summed up exactly what I was going to say. As somebody who's not from Pennsylvania, in my perception, limited time I've spent there, was always sort of, yeah, you've got Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, but there's all that land in between. And then as you look into it, you see how many people are involved in hunting in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Astronomical. I mean, Pennsylvania, from what I understand, has one of the only elk herds on the East Coast, at least, from what I understand. So it's definitely got habitat, and you have those sort of rolling mountainous areas that are
Yeah.
part of the Appalachian Trail. Obviously, runs through parts of Pennsylvania, and if you just go outside of the urban areas, it's just nothing but woods and hills. I mean, driving through, even through some of the other areas, on my way to the Ohio Bigfoot Conference or Ohio itself, you drive through a lot of these areas and you have those
Mhm.
farms, rural areas, and you can see why this would be a perfect area for all sorts of wildlife to live, let alone something that maybe was trying to stay hidden.
Absolutely. If you jump on Interstate 80, you say you go to the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, you're going through northern Pennsylvania. You're going to go right through one of the more active areas of the state, Clearfield County. You drive right through Clearfield County. Uh, we could spend weeks talking about Clearfield County in itself, because it's such a interesting place. It's probably just as active as the southern tip of the Chestnut Ridge, Fayette County, Westmoreland, those areas. Clearfield County is probably the that same type of atmosphere up north, with a little bit of the high strangeness built in. That's not absent. When we were doing the filming for On the Trail of UFOs, you and I are both, I think we're in episode 3.
Yeah, I believe episode 3, we both talk about Pennsylvania and our
Yeah.
experiences in that area.
Check it out, listeners. Episode 3. It's the only one you need to watch. It's the best one.
Yeah, right. And we had Seth on last week, so if you guys want to hear more about that, Seth was on last week's show.
Good friend. I love Seth. And
Oh yeah.
when I was talking to Seth and my portion that didn't make it onto the film in this episode of this season, one of the things I said is you really can't talk about Pennsylvania Bigfoot without talking about UFOs. Whether you believe it or not, or you think there's a connection, because of some of the stranger things that's happened. And you go into the 70s, the early 70s in Westmoreland County, there was that huge UFO Bigfoot flap, that Stan Gordon's made a career out of talking about. Love Stan. I got to poke at Stan a little bit too.
It's a fantastic book he wrote on that as well,
Yeah,
with the
several
iconic
books.
little green cover. That's the one I have, is the one with the green cover and the Sasquatch standing there with the UFO in the background. Just
Silent
very,
Invasion, is that the one?
I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that gets chronicled pretty heavily about the concurrency between the UFO sightings and the Bigfoot reports and the flashes of light. And you see these reports happen in Clearfield County. Not as frequent, but they still happen. And it's just, I'm a flesh and blood guy, Alex. I
yeah,
think Bigfoot is a flesh and blood animal. I'm not going to take that away from anything, but there are things that we have to understand happen because people tell us they do. We only have the eyewitness testimony to go on. They're telling us these things are happening. Do you throw it out and discard it? No, and that's where I kind of applaud Stan. Is Stan's found a way to catalog this stuff and keep it and still keep it fresh for all these years, but not just dismiss it. And when you ask Stan, I don't think Stan's ever come out, and I could be wrong, but I don't think Stan's ever come out and said there's a UFO Bigfoot connection. I think he leaves it up to you, to interpret. And I respect that. I respect that a lot.
yeah, absolutely. That's even just personally. I mean, I was always more a crypto guy. I was into the cryptozoology, the Bigfoot. Wasn't really that big into UFOs, and I
Mhm.
sort of blame Pennsylvania for kind of dragging me into that world. There's this area that we can talk more about that I've investigated now 2 years in a row. We're supposed to be going this third year. The site that we both investigated, where I saw a UFO with some colleagues of mine here from the New England area, and we got it on video, and it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. And my primary interest in that area was people reporting seeing Bigfoot sightings. And
Mhm.
the year before, I had interviewed 3 generations of a family that were claiming to have Bigfoot activity on their property. And that's one of the more popular interviews actually on this channel, just them talking about all the strange things that happened over the past few years. But you've been in this so long in terms of investigating Pennsylvania specifically. Is there a Bigfoot case or two that really sticks out to you in terms of this is something that's just so interesting that, for you either sways you one way or another, or is just plain interesting?
Well, I look at it, I guess, from the opposite view of a lot of people's. I don't look at it as the Bigfoot as the most important factor. I look at it as the people, right? I
Mhm.
look at these are people that have experienced something. They need someone to talk to. They need someone to help them reconcile what they just experienced. And if we can collect a little data along the way or get some physical evidence, that's fantastic. And I go out and I do the regular research like everybody else does too. Tree knocking, and for what that's worth, I don't know. We do it because it seems to get some results, right? But I'm more interested in this for the people. I've said for years, part of your job as an investigator is also a guidance counselor because you're helping these people really go through something traumatic. It's not normal to walk out your back door and see a 7 to 8 foot tall ape-like creature meandering through your property. That doesn't happen every day. If it did, you and I would be talking about bingo right now and not Bigfoot. And uh, I don't think people that take this, that are super skeptical about it, I don't think they appreciate that from the witness perspective. And these are everyday people. They're not crackpots and weirdos. And we go back. You asked me about a particular case. I think of I'll just call them by their first names, Dave and Diane, out in the northwestern part of the state. They're a husband and wife, elderly couple that live out in a remote part of Pennsylvania that's kind of seasonally attended, like a summer area. They live out there year round, and he's a retired school teacher. She's a retired nurse. Very credible people. He's blind for the most part, and he really didn't believe his wife either until he started experiencing things through his other senses that led him to believe she was being quite truthful and she wasn't out of her mind. And one morning, while it was raining outside, she went to let her dog go out to the bathroom. And as she goes outside, she sees this. The dog stops at the end of the deck and won't proceed any further. And she's like, well, what's wrong with you? Why don't you go out and go to the bathroom? And she looks down and there's this light that's over a dumpster area. And she sees this Bigfoot creature going through her dumpster.
Wow.
Okay. This woman has no reason to lie to me. They contacted us. They met up with us at a over the mountain. It's one of my favorite places in Clearfield.
It's a great place.
They take Bigfoot sightings for us up there too. Steve and Kim and them. And we talked about it, and they were really hesitant to bring us out there. But after building a relationship, they took us out there. I have no reason to believe they didn't experience what they did. And even ongoing things that have happened with them over time, I find them to be some of the most credible, honest people I've encountered. And, when you look at it from a hoaxing standpoint, what do these people have to gain? Nothing. They're elderly. He's blind. What do they have to gain from any of this? Nothing. They didn't have to report this. That same year, on New Year's Eve, two sets of witnesses, two husband and wife couples, witnessed what I believe to be the same creature hours apart from one another,
Wow.
crossing the same road. They described it, and these folks have never met before, and I made sure of that because we were actually the first ones to bring them together after we interviewed them independently. They described the same creatures, same down to the same color of the bottom of the foot.
That's amazing.
So when you have witness material, you have witness, documentation like that, how do you throw that away? Either some of these people are the best conspirators and bullcrabbers I've ever met, or they really experienced what they experienced. And I'm not ready to discount that. Now, there are some people I've met through this that have just been full of crap, and they have been, nothing better than the waste of my time, but they get something out of it because they think it's funny, or, they want to, try to make a mockery out of what we do. That doesn't sit well with me, but we can pretty well discern that right from the get-go. We're getting really good at that, people. If you want to hoax us, don't do it, because we're getting good at determining it right away. Like I said, it's the people that do it for me, Alex. I'm really attracted to the people and the human experience just as much as I'm trying to, get evidence for its existence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people obviously play such a crucial role. Those of us that are interested in this or that investigate it, oftentimes we don't have experiences. It's the people that we speak to that we're relying on them
Mhm.
for that sort of that anecdotal data, if you will, which I think is really
Yeah,
interesting. It's
we
really
need
cool.
them.
We're getting a lot of awesome. I put some of the comments up. People watching from Argentina,
Oh,
Massachusetts,
neat.
Brazil, all over the place. So hey to everyone. So I think we'll start taking some couple audience questions in, then we'll continue conversation about Clearfield County. So here's one from Illuminathan79. Why do you think Sasquatch is flesh and blood?
Well, it leaves scat, it leaves hair. I haven't seen one fade in and out of a wormhole. I haven't seen one lifted up by a UFO. It leaves physical evidence, which leaves me to believe that it's a physical creature. That's my belief. That doesn't mean it's true. That doesn't mean it is what it is, but that's what I think it is. The predominant amount of researchers also agree with me, and so does most of science that actually takes it seriously. So when you look at those factors going into it, I think I'm more comfortable saying it's a flesh and blood creature, but that doesn't mean it is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to distinguish. You're not completely closing off from another possibility. Here's a good one from Guy15. He says, this is all interesting because I live in Allegheny, PA. And then his question is, where do you think the Bigfoot hotspots in Pennsylvania are?
Well, if you live in Allegheny, you're not talking about Allegheny County. You live, which is also a hotspot. If you live in the Allegheny National Forest, you're right in the smack dab of a hotspot in Pennsylvania yourself. But you've got Clearfield, Allegheny, Cook's Forest out there. I think that's in Jefferson County. Uh, you have Fayette County, Westmoreland County. That southeast, or I'm sorry, southwest portion of the state. It's a pretty active, hot area. I would say more of the northern central counties you would see more reports from if the people weren't so conservative and would be more comfortable talking about it. And it's taken me a long time to get the reports that I've gotten out of this area because of that. These are real serious hunter type people up here, and they don't take kindly to people, coming to them with questions about an imaginary monster. They don't want anything to affect their way of life. And my grandfather, he passed away a few years ago now. He's known I was into this, my whole life, and didn't share an experience he had with me until the year he died. So you're talking about almost 80 years. 45 years he had an experience and never shared it with me until he almost, until his last year of life. So it takes a long time for people to talk about these things. It's just, we, as people that, watch these podcasts or just sit down to, have conversations, we're already, even if you're not a full believer, you're believe enough to sit down and listen to the question. There are people out there that are real 100% diehard this doesn't exist. And unfortunately, I happen to live in the middle of the place where they're everywhere. So it takes a lot of coaxing to get people to even sit down and want to have the conversation about the possibility of Bigfoot out here.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of people probably struggle with, is just being able to talk about this open. And I think you brought up a good point in saying that, what do people have to gain? I find a lot of times people have something to lose by bringing these kinds of stories forward. They lose credibility. People get called crazy. I mean, we know there's a stigma for this entire sort of subject, and maybe there's a loosening a little bit in regards to the UFO phenomena. I think in the past couple of years, it's mainstream news almost weekly now. You have something about the Navy or whatever. Maybe there's a little bit of less of a stigma with Bigfoot too, with the popularity of some of the shows and pop cultural icons. But there's plenty of places where people just clam right up, and even if they've maybe had something happen, you have to wonder, are they trying to rationalize it in a way that works for them? I don't know. I haven't really had that defined of an experience to be able to know that. Just having spoken to people, I think it's just interesting to see how they respond to it and how they sort of try and carry their story, and if they even choose to share it.
I think you have to credit Finding Bigfoot a little bit with not so much the popularity, because I know there's a lot of people in research that found that show to be just as useless as any other Bigfoot show
Right.
out there. But I think uh, it legitimized what researchers do for the most part, and kind of made it fun to talk about in a way that wasn't kitschy, and legitimized what we do a little bit. We have to be thankful for that. People, it used to be, oh, you're a Bigfoot guy, haha, and the jokes would
Right.
roll. And then after Finding Bigfoot, after people watched like a season or 10 of it, whoever there was on TV, they don't laugh anymore. They actually have legitimate and smart questions. Not is there more than one, which is the stupidest question on the face of the earth. And if you ask it, I will tell you you're stupid. Of course there is. But uh, people are really starting to accept the possibility. And that's the only thing I ever ask people. I'm not asking you to believe. I'm asking you to just accept the possibility that it could. And that's an entirely different conversation. It takes no faith, no leap of faith for you to admit it. Just, yeah, you know what? I guess it's possible. And the same with the gentleman with the flesh, or the person, sorry, I don't want to assume genders there, with the flesh and blood question. Uh, that's as far as a leap of faith as I'm willing to take at this point. That's what I believe. And if you other believe that, fantastic. I'll sit down and talk with you about it. I'll collect the information. That's just not what I personally believe, but I respect if you do.
Yep. I think a lot of times people really try to push their point to the point where it becomes maybe unpalatable. They
Mhm.
try so hard to convince you whether one way or the other. And I think that's a really good approach you have personally. Just the open-mindedness, because
You
you
don't
have,
want to alienate,
yeah, and you have
you know?
people that are really putting their credibility on the line just to tell their story. I mean, it's just strange if there's really nothing, like you said, to gain from a lot of this sort of stuff, which in most cases I feel there is not. So here's a couple other interesting questions. We have Jordan asking, has Sean ever spoken with Barry Clark? If so, what does he think of his personal experiences?
I
Not
don't
sure.
know Barry Clark, but if he'd like to talk to me, he's more than welcome to hit me up. I'd like to hear about his experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I'll leave a link in the comment to somewhere, or you can tell me where people can contact you, and I'll drop that down below.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Squatchaholic says, do you think there's any relation in PA sightings in the location of underground government facilities? Now, this stuff comes up a lot with Pennsylvania, I feel like.
Well, it's funny, and I hope I don't get him in trouble by telling this story. We spent a lot of time out in an area called State Game Lands 252, the Elvira bunkers. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's kind of like an old TNT bomb making facility, very similar to
Interesting.
Point Pleasant, West
Yep.
Virginia. And it's just about 20 miles away from where I live. And my buddy who's in the National Guard got me a map, and the map happened to have a uh, what's the word I'm thinking of? Blueprint of tunnels
Wow.
underneath some of the bunkers, and he got that for me, and he got demoted and almost. So we had to give the
Uh-oh.
map back, but anything's possible. I don't want to discount it. Do I think so? We're assuming a lot from the government. We put so much faith that these government entities are so smart. Uh, they aren't, and let's not give them too much credit.
Right.
I just don't know. I try to stay away from government conspiracies mainly because I don't want people knocking at my door or disappearing. If I disappear or somebody says I killed myself, be rest assured I love myself way too much to do that. And I want an investigation done if it happens. And if I disappear, I'm just not going to disappear. I'm rather large to begin with, so it ain't going to be easy.
Oh man, yeah. An interesting point. I just want you to maybe talk about. So you mentioned state game lands. That's something
Mm-hmm.
I've experienced in Pennsylvania, where you have just plots of land that are just called
Mm-hmm.
state game lands. I don't think a lot of states do that. Do you want to just explain to people what that, what a state game land is?
Yeah, they're regulated areas. They're maintained by the state. Some have agreement with farmers where they can, put up, crops or use some areas for storage or their facilities. There's hunting ranges, equestrian trails in some of them. And mainly it's kind of a free source area to use
Yep.
for outdoor recreational activities. And also, they are, most of them, I don't want to say all of them, but most of them are huntable during hunting season. So they're kind of state sponsored hunting grounds, I guess, is another good way of putting it.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting when you went just looking at areas I've been in Pennsylvania, you just see so many of them. You'll see, 51, 37, all just different ones. I don't know how the number system works, but they're just plotted all over the place. Is there more sightings in those areas, or is that because there's more people frequenting those spots that maybe there would be sightings, or what is it? What do you think in your experience?
I can't say there is. There's a lot of state game lands that have no Bigfoot sightings, or at least none reported to to anywhere I would be able to reference. State game lands 252 I can speak of because it's an area I kind of use it to take newer researchers out.
Hmm.
But in about '07, I got a decent amount of sightings from that area and some strange vocalizations from that location. So I guess it's all relative, like you said. Is it because they're more frequented by people? Uh, yeah, I don't know. I wish I could answer that question more concretely. I don't have the answer for that.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate your honesty. And as you mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania has a lot of woods and a
Yeah.
lot of space, so it would make sense that sightings wouldn't exactly be happening in certain concentrated areas. That's similar here in New England, where we just have so much woods. I couldn't really say that there would be a hotspot or not if somebody were to ask.
I've had that conversation with Eric Altman that hotspots, and you get sightings in hotspots, you're a little bit more, reticent to, jump on them because they're a historical area of active activity, meaning they're also quite publicized. So anybody get in there, they could read a little bit about some of these reports, and they could do a pretty decent job, capable job of fabricating one if they wanted to. So whenever we get a sighting from a hotspot area, we tend to be a lot more suspect going into it than we would be if it came from just another, random part of the state.
Yeah, that's very smart. So, Crash Course Cryptozoology, Carrick asks, considering your viewpoint that the Sasquatch is a flesh and blood species, what kind of animal do you think we're talking about? Ape, human, prehistoric survivor? Any theories?
Well, I don't think it's a human. Uh, I think it could be. You don't want to call it the missing link, like the prehistoric survivor. But what I do think is you have a species of prehistoric ape that has managed to adapt to the climate of North America, and it leaves physical traces, footprints. I feel as if it was human, it would be a little bit more communicable to us over time. Now, listen, here we go again. There are people who said they have had some experiences with Bigfoot and they've been able to talk to them, where it's ask them for garlic and so on and so forth. And I don't believe that. I don't think it's happened. But, if you go into Tom Powell's book and read The Locals, if you haven't read that book,
Amazing.
it's a great book. There are, cases he puts in there that have, again, kind of challenged my own viewpoints on things, but I don't think it's enough to get to me to move my needle that it's anything more than an ape. And we say that like it's disrespectful. It's not. Apes are living, breathing creatures. They're beautiful and magnificent. You look at gorillas.
Extremely intelligent.
I hate chimpanzees. I'm sorry, I can't get close to it. They're evil, and I'm not a fan. But orangutans, they're living, breathing creatures, right? And they deserve the respect and reverence that go with them. I don't think they should be harmed in any way. But why do we treat the Sasquatch? Why does it have to be human? And again, I think that comes from the human necessity to anthropomorphize things,
Yeah.
where we get comfortable because it takes some of the edge off. And I just don't think we're there close enough yet to say it is. There are people that have had experiences. I'll grant them that. I just don't think, again, and I'll say this 100 times, probably do this to me, it's not enough for me to move the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. Guy 15 just following up on his question there. I'm going camping in Ohio Pile State Park in July. Maybe I'll see one. Best of luck.
Maybe you will. Maybe you'll find me and Seth Breedlove there at one of the local watering holes. Seth loves Ohio Pile, and we had a great night at the Bigfoot Camping Adventure Weekend that Eric Altman put on. And somehow he, myself, Cliff Barrickman, and the Ohio Night Stalker guys ended up closing down a bar, eating chocolate cake. And it was one of the best nights of my life. I know Seth talks about it all the time. It was just a great time, and it just happened to happen because we were there for Bigfoot.
That's hilarious. That's great. I think the experiences that come along with it make so much more of the of being into this subject. You meet some fantastic people. So Lori Jones asks, where is the best site to report a UFO Bigfoot in the same encounter? I don't know if that for Pennsylvania specifically or
Stan Gordon.
Yeah.
Yep, stangordon.info is the best place to report a sighting like that. And I know I'm sure somebody will probably be angry at me, but Stan's the man. He's somebody I respect. He's a good friend. He's a mentor. And, he's put enough time and effort into this that he gets first dibs, in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. So I think we'll do just a couple more and then we'll talk about the area there. So rocket reindeer, this is interesting, bringing Dogman in. Is there any physical evidence for the Dogman as an actual creature? Or is it just created for tourists? If real, is it somehow connected to Sasquatch? Really putting you on the spot there.
Well, I happen to work with a couple guys named Lon Strickler and Butch Wachowski, and they're both really big into the Dogman phenomena. I've had a correlative relationship with it, only be from my hosting of Arcane Radio when I was on that program, and seeing the reports coming in, the like and loop. Again, Pennsylvania happens to be an area where there's a lot of concentration of Dogman sightings, but I don't think it's done anything to boost the economy or tourism. I think it's a good example of a potential sighting that happened that spurred a lot of other sightings. Now, Butch has been on the ground and investigated several of these. I know Brian Seach, Fred Saluga, a bunch of individuals have gone out and investigated some of these Dogman sightings. I don't know. Jury's still out on Dogman for me.
Yeah.
It's not a Bigfoot. I think some Bigfoot sightings may have been, or some Dogman sightings may be confused with Bigfoot, but I don't think they're related in any sense of the way.
Ah, interesting. Here's a classic one. Do you think Patterson film is real? I do. Jason Childs asked that. So,
I believe Bob Gimlin's telling the truth. What that truth is, I think after all these years, nobody's been able to prove that it's a fake. John Johnson put together a good documentary called Hoax of the Century. It's a counterpoint to what a lot of people believe, and John's not the most popular guy with people, but it was a really good effort to try to spin another viewpoint. I met Bob Gimlin, talked to Bob Gimlin. I think Bob's a very honest man. I think he saw what he saw. And after all these years, no one's been able to prove a costume. Nobody's been able to get the details of the costume right. I hate to be on the spot to call Bob Hieronymus a liar, because in that documentary, he comes across sometimes just as honest as Bob. So I don't know. I think the Patterson film, for me, is real, but if next Tuesday it was proven to be a hoax, it wouldn't be the end of my belief in Bigfoot.
Yeah. And that's a great answer. And I like that you brought up bringing in an opposing viewpoint, because I think people oftentimes entrench themselves in one position, aren't willing to look at, well, perhaps there's another possibility here.
There's a
I
cult
think,
phenomena around the Patterson film. I hate to say it. I love Bob, I do, but there's a following that you know that it's the real deal, and quite possibly it is the real deal. It's just that you just can't lay out the fact that there's reasonable doubt to say otherwise. And like I said, if you've built your entire belief of Bigfoot and your entire foundation of the research on the Patterson film, that's foolish. You just can't do it.
yeah. And I think that firmly believe that that's obviously never going to prove Bigfoot's real or not. It hasn't in the whole time it's been analyzed, but I think it's almost a moot point at this stage. I mean, the
Great video.
depiction, yeah, even the Bigfoot behind you on the sign there, that classic walk. I mean,
Oh, great.
almost every Bigfoot in pop culture or souvenirs has that classic gait, if you will. So it's definitely won't go away, but I don't think it's really going to make a difference at this point. And I think you brought up some fantastic. We'll take one more question before we talk a little bit more about a question I have. This is from my buddy Stefan. As a researcher who's focused on educating the unknowing public, how do you walk the line without pushing an agenda? Have you ever encountered a witness who you thought was lying? You kind of mentioned that a little bit, and that's definitely an interesting point. Thanks, Stefan.
Uh, I am always interested in educating the public. I think we do a disservice by not trying to reach that segment of people who want to know more about what we do. And again, for years, there was a stigma associated with what we do. We were kind of the carnies of science, right? Uh, and that's not the case anymore. And I'm happy and proud of that. Like, I've been doing this now since I was 9 years old, which seems silly to think someone at nine, but uh, all those years I put into this, learning myself, considering myself always to be a student, no matter what. Like, I'm always here to learn every day from everybody. Uh, it's really important. I don't have an agenda to really push. I guess I'm here for the same reason you are, Alex, to talk to people and to discover what I can. And if at the end of the day we prove this thing is real, fantastic. If not, there's always another generation of truth seekers out there willing to find it. And people lie. They just do. Sometimes people lie for stupid reasons. And sometimes people just want attention. And it happens. I've never had a moment where I've had to be, really short or angry with somebody who was lying, but we've been pretty firm with them from time to time that look, it's not cool to waste time. Like, it's this isn't funded by any kind of government agency or any
Right.
kind of public corporation. It comes from the In My Pocket Fund, and we're limited with what we have. For some people, this is a hobby. It beats bowling.
Yeah.
For me, this is what I do for fun. And if we prove something along the way, that's great. The sad part is we haven't yet. We're getting closer. I think we're getting better. But where the miss is, you still have a lot of people that aren't taking the time to get formalized training in these subjects. So a lot of the people I work with now, when we go out in investigation, are retired law enforcement. One is and actually he's just really starting to get into this. He's a retired homicide detective. He was the supervisor for a homicide department in our local town. He was a canine officer. So like he's got a lot of experience that he's starting to, pass on to me about things so we can share it with other researchers, because these are, fundamental skills that we just don't have unless you've spent the time in those fields and you've actually put them into practical use. So I guess if any agenda I am trying to push is that it's, be open-minded, but, use as many tools and resources as you have to come out with a competent investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow up to that Dogman question was Rocky Rainier just saying thanks. I just asked because some witnesses claim to have seen Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and Dogman together in sights. So yeah, I suppose that's. And somebody actually put in a comment. My son saw a creature crossing I-79 in front of his car when he was driving in the Zelion Opal area. He says it looked
Mhm.
like a classic werewolf. So it's interesting.
Yeah. If they haven't, they should report that over to phantomsandmonsters.com because we have a task force set up to investigate those reports, and I'm sure we'd love to have it for the database.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I promise I'll get back to some of the other questions we have in here, but I just want to talk a little bit about this area that we call the Pennsylvania Triangle. You called it, I think, 516.
516. Yeah, we named it after the birth date of one of my research partners, who's not. I don't know where he is anymore. He could have been abducted by aliens, for all I know. But uh, this is funny, Alex, because I didn't know you were even investigating this. I think until we started doing On the Trail of UFOs, or we started talking about getting ready to do this. And
Yeah.
uh, I met the witnesses. Oh, you met them. What year did you meet those folks?
So I think the first year I was there was 2018, so just 2 years
Okay.
ago, and I've only been there twice. So that first initial time in 2019.
So I met them in 2009. It was about April or May of 2009. I was doing a little presentation at a bookstore. And when I say little, like 12 people showed up. And but it was really cool because 12 people showed up, and that was before Bigfoot was really all over the place. And I did our presentation. At the end of the presentation, these two ladies walked up to me and they showed me some footprints they had in the snow. And when you have somebody that shows you evidence in front of you, that really piques your interest. As we get to talk to them a little bit, uh, Ernie and I decide, my research partner at the time, decide we're committed to go out and start investigating this. And Alex, I told you, a while back, and before we were starting to do this, my wife and my father-in-law were in the back of the room, which is funny because my wife has no interest in any of this stuff that I do, aside from humoring me every once in a while. And she's talking to these witnesses. I'm like, well, what is my wife doing talking to them? And so after we pack things up, I talk to my wife and I say, Laura, do you know those ladies I was talking to? She goes, yeah. She goes, that was my babysitter when I was a kid. And I told you, when you think about the synchronicities of life, and
Such a small world.
it's a small world. And so right away, you start adding a little bit more legitimacy behind the witnesses. So we go out there, I think either May or June of 2009, and we met the witnesses. But as well as I do, when you go out there, you don't meet just the witness. You meet almost the entire family because the family lives on this land.
Very special, the fact that there's that sort
Yeah,
of familial thing. And in
yeah.
my experience, it was almost as if different houses on the property were having different sort of things
Hmm.
going on. And I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you've observed that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that attracted me there was the footprints, the Bigfoot sightings. As we get there, you start to uncover a little bit more. And because so much information is being thrown at you when you're there, you're like, you calling it the Pennsylvania Triangle is very appropriate. Because I'm sitting here on the drive home and I'm talking to Ernie, and I'm literally like, and part of my French, I'm like, this is the largest crock of shit I've ever been, out to. Like, this can't possibly be real. And Ernie's like, now come on, you can't talk like that. They wanted us out there, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, all right. So, I talked to my wife, and my wife's like, she's, a very honest person. And I'm like, okay, whatever, get off my back. I guess I'll believe him. So I go out there, and, the story I tell, and on the trail, I'm down in the little campground area. Ernie and the one witness is out in one area, and I have the two boys, and there's it's starting to storm a little bit. There's a flash of light and lightning or whatever have you. I don't know what it was. And they saw a figure in the woods. And they're like, Sean, did you see that? And I'm like, no, but I don't want to. Let's get the hell out of here. Because, folks, if you've not been to this area, you probably won't be to this area. But Alex can tell you, it's
Very
got a
creepy.
vibe.
Oh,
It's got a vibe.
very creepy. You're going down this little road, a lot of
Mhm.
junk on the either side, and you're just kind of in this little pavilion. I mean, it's not even really a cabin; it's just a
No,
sort of pavilion type thing
it is.
in the middle of the woods, and you're just surrounded by, well, a little river, a little stream. It's very creepy area, especially at night. And we heard about some of the encounters that took place there, and that definitely didn't help alleviate our kind of tension. And I slept down there alone in a camper van, and every 2 minutes, I'm looking out the windows and expecting to see something in my face.
It's I try not to add any hyperbole to to what we're talking about, but I can't stress that enough that the vibes you get from that area are not natural. Uh, you got talk of Indian burial grounds up there that's
Yeah,
documented up near the
I think the
house.
University of Pennsylvania was doing that, right?
Yeah, yep,
So
documented. A
you have
meteorite
that.
strike.
I was going to mention, so how I originally found out about it was friends of mine here in the New England area, Paul and Ben Eno, who have Behind the Paranormal. They're authors, and they had done a
Mhm.
similar sort of Connecticut triangle case. And one of the witnesses there had actually reached out to them, or actually to an author friend of theirs, and they got into contact. And based on that, they kind of were talking over the phone, and then they started going out to this spot every spring. And they've been there 4 or 5 years in a row, and they were much more into ghosts and UFOs, and they actually ended up seeing a Bigfoot, a couple of them there at one point. And then I joined on the team 2018, like I said, and the first year we were there, we saw what we thought was a red orb in the woods down by that same pavilion you were at,
Yeah,
very briefly. So I can't really say definitively what it was or not, but it definitely was in the trees. It was low, and there are towers in the area where you can see red lights, as well as it was lower than where the ground was, where you'd see, let's say, the red in the back of a car on the taillights. And it wasn't until last year where we were kind of all deployed in different areas of the property. I was down the ravine where the Bigfoot stuff had happened, just hunkered down in a truck. We all went back up to the main property, and we began observing the stars. Beautiful starlit night, and we
yeah.
saw this like what looked like a cloud with a light inside of it, just meandering through the air almost like a leaf in slow motion. And we watched another object fly out of it and back into it, and we got it on video at one point, and we have actually audio as well from that, somebody trying to get it with their cell phone. So you have the audio and the video of what was happening, and very strange. And that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I was much more interested in the Bigfoot. Like I said, I was kind of like, okay, there's people saying there's black helicopters, all this sort of other stuff. I don't really know. I was a little bit more interested in the Bigfoot, and now I guess, a little more open-minded to some of the other stuff going on
Yeah,
there.
absolutely, me too. And 516 Pennsylvania Triangle really helped me open my mind to it a little bit more. And there was a point in my research where I was really uh, rigid in my beliefs, and sometimes a little extreme, in that I wouldn't tolerate anything other than it being flesh and blood. But as I've spent the time and uh, talked to folks and actually kind of opened my mind, a little bit, sometimes there's no rational explanation for some of the things we've seen, or explanation that we know to be possible now.
Right.
And I think that's an important component of it too. We don't know everything. We think
Absolutely.
we do, but we just don't know. And when we start closing our minds off, we do lose a little bit of that. And this is supposed to be wondrous and inspiring and mysterious. That's why we're in it. Like, after this, I don't know what you're going to do if we prove it. I'm going to need a new hobby. So, uh, what's that line from Harry and the Hendersons? There's always Loch Ness, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Uh, I don't. Part of me doesn't want this mystery to ever be solved. Like, I
Exactly.
want it to go on until I die, which, I'm one prime rib away from the end of the world. Who knows? But we definitely experience some weird stuff there, and I'm not going to dismiss it. Some researchers have. I think some researchers' behavior has also discouraged some truth, that the truth that's happened in that area. I'm willing to go back, definitely, and check it out and spend some more time there. I've been away from it now for some time. I'd like to go back and see what's different, and how the witnesses are different, because they've been experiencing this continuously now for a long time. And how
Absolutely.
has that impacted them dealing with this for so long? I don't know if we have a legitimate case study in Pennsylvania where people have gone through and experienced this phenomena for such an extended period of time, and the property owner even longer than when we first showed up in '09. So that's a
Yeah.
long time.
And I hope that if we're able to get back there at some point, you'd be able to join us while we're there. I think that would be interesting. We're both removed by almost a decade in terms of when
Yeah,
we were at this property, and both have had similar conclusions. And you mentioned over the top, the over the mountain there, the little restaurant. That's actually where we had sort of a town hall.
I had one there too.
We were so excited to tell our UFO story, and we told everyone. And I mean, the response was funny. It was sort of like, yeah, I mean, that happens all the time here. It wasn't People weren't overly amazed. We're all over the mountain, so to speak,
Mhm.
about how excited we were about the story, and people were just sort of like, yeah, I mean, that's happens all the time out here. It's not that strange, which I think is very interesting because it just shows that these people a lot of times are just so used to this kind of stuff. They live with it all the time. That those of us
Yeah,
that don't, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, I look at the UFO that we saw there, and I truly say just UFO because that could have been some sort of secret government technology that we're 10 years behind on. That's absolutely possible. All I know is that it was something that I've never seen before, and none of the more seasoned investigators in the group with me had ever experienced before. Just something that sort of seemed to defy the gravity or the laws of gravity that craft around here would use, that or that things that we're familiar with rather. So it's such a fascinating area, and I can't wait to get back. We were supposed to go this month under normal circumstances, so hopefully in the fall at some point we'll have to see.
absolutely. I'd love to join you guys. You just send the word, and I'll be there because I think it's time to go back. I Clearfield County in general is just that spot in Pennsylvania for me that, I had a experience myself there. I don't talk about that experience too often. It almost made me quit research in general. It was a sighting experience because it happened throughout the course of a night. And I'll tell you about that another time because that'll go on for hours in itself. But it almost made me give up the research, and it took me years to even go back to Clearfield County.
Right.
Uh,
I think you mentioned that a little bit involving a campfire and
yeah,
yeah, I think yeah. So it's
not a
interesting you say that.
teaser, but it's a long story. It really is.
Right.
It's not something that can be wrapped up in like 3 minutes. It's a long
Absolutely.
story.
Yeah, and we'll have to have you back on and just
Absolutely.
give you the floor and have you talk about it. So I think we'll take a little bit more of the questions here. We have some questions from a little while ago. West Virginia Cryptids and Strange Encounters asked, Sean, have you ever been to the Quebec Run area?
Yes, Eric Altman has taken me there several times. Is that Les?
That is less,
Yeah.
yeah. I
I've
was looking
never
for a second. I'm like, that
I've
has
never
to be
had the
less.
privilege of meeting him in person that I can recall, and I would hope I would recall it, or I'm just rude. But I watch his videos. I have a
Yeah,
lot of
he's got great
respect for him.
stuff.
I'd like to meet him and investigate with him sometime. He's a really cool dude.
Yeah, he'll be on the show next week, guys.
I'll
So
be watching.
this time he will be on, and we'll be talking about West Virginia, another weird state.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, yes, yeah, fantastic videos. I've seen some of his stuff recently. So I don't know if this is just kind of just addressed to both of us. Are you guys evolutionist?
Nah, no. I get that's a loaded question, don't you
Yeah,
think? Like,
definitely. It's a very on the spot kind of question.
I think you have religious views, which I
Yeah,
don't, promote mine, too terribly. I'm Eastern Orthodox Christian, so I
both
have.
of us are actually.
Yeah, actually, quite a few of us that investigate this area have some experience with Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Paul,
Yeah,
uh, it's funny, right? Another
yeah, and I think
synchronicity.
we mentioned that last week's show with
Mhm,
Seth. Somebody asked, how does your background as a Christian influence some of this stuff? And I think I briefly mentioned, in Eastern Orthodoxy, there's a little bit more maybe mysticism than in some
mhm,
of the Western churches, and I
absolutely.
didn't really see much of a conflict there. But
I asked a priest, what's so wrong about wanting to investigate Bigfoot, and the priest said to me, "Well, if it's one of God's creatures, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it." So, and that's kind of the viewpoint I took with it. I'm not going to tell you folks what to believe. I think there is science that says there have been rocks that have been around for hundreds of millions of years. I believe science. I also have my religious views that guide me in being a pretty, try to be the best person I could possibly be. So somewhere in the middle, these things happen. I guess I guess you have to look at things from a scientific perspective and rationalize them and say, you know what, there are some evidence. And, when you look into religion, so much of it is interpretive that we really don't know how they measured time and so on and so forth. So it's all, up in the air. Why not? I guess, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's one actually about more investigating. Do you actually go out by day or night doing investigations in the woods? If so, what kind of equipment do you use? FLIR, drones, trail cameras?
I do both. I do daytime and nighttime investigations. If uh, I think Bigfoot, there's enough Bigfoot sightings that happen in the day that they do at night. There's merit to investigate at all times. Uh, I'm not a big believer in technology, Alex,
Hmm,
out in the woods. I don't know if it's actually helpful or not. When you see how long we've been using thermal, how much have we actually gotten from it? How much have we actually gotten from video? How much have we actually gotten from photography? Not a lot. So is it really helping us? Unfortunately, we use these tools and take them with us because we want to document something, but they also emit frequency and sound,
yeah.
and that could be detrimental to what we're trying to do. The late Bill Dranginis, dear friend of mine, I miss him a lot.
Oh,
He
me too.
uh, he was working on camera systems that virtually emitted no frequency. I
Amazing.
gotcha the I gotcha cam, and
Yeah, he used those on Lake Champlain, and we
yeah,
were
in the
documenting that
documentary.
on the Trail Champ. Yeah, rest in peace. What a great
Yeah,
investigator.
yeah, I miss Bill. He when he got the property, uh, the cabin, he invited me out many times, and we were never able to make it work. And I really wish if I could turn back time, I'd go out and spend the time with him out there because I miss so much education. He was a great guy, a brilliant man, and just so cool to be around. And he also
Oh
introduced me
yeah.
to Blueberry Hooch. So uh,
His
I
encounter is one of my favorites. I mean, just the story with
absolutely
the FBI guys and
so
the
good.
Civil War relics. I mean, it's just such a perfect storm of occurrences to have that sort of an encounter.
Yeah, just he was ahead of the time with some of this technology too. He really was.
Well, that's what, and not to focus so much on that, but the technology aspect. But in terms of his experience, I mean, he had an experience, and based on that, he was able to branch into Lake Champlain because he
Hmm.
connected, as you mentioned earlier, with the human aspect of it. He's talking to these people who claim to have seen this lake monster. And he's like, they're exhibiting the same sort of behaviors and the way they talk about it as I do about Sasquatch or other people do about Sasquatch. They had something in common, and I don't think that's something you can get with technology. That being said, I do think technology, in certain cases, can play a very integral role, especially audio. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm a techie. As a filmmaker, I'm always got a camera, a drone, something on me, and that's maybe more in the interest of getting an artistic shot. But if I were to see some, a moose or something interesting in the woods, you bet I would try to capture it on video. And audio I think has been phenomenal in terms of the Sasquatch research, perhaps more so than video or other
Yeah,
things that have been tried technologically, so to speak.
I do take audio recorders with me. I have a Zoom audio recorder. I've been looking for years about upgrading it.
Yeah.
I tried to use a GoPro, and I always had the thing pointed backwards so I could see if something was behind me, and I could never keep the batteries charged long enough
Right.
to make them work. So I guess whatever you want to use
Zooms are
out there,
fantastic. This
folks.
is I just got this new Zoom because my other one actually broke. It's still
Okay,
usable, but I can no longer put it on a tripod. And this is something that I just like hang in the tent at night when I'm sleeping and
I
just
have the
have it just
previous
in case.
version of that.
Yeah, that's probably the one I
Yeah.
have that's broken somewhere. It's still usable, but not very great at this point.
Definitely want to get a new one. I think they're really important. I got a sound file that I'm still, I think I'm going to send to David Ellis. At the time, I didn't know who to send it to,
Right.
and I actually lost it for many years and just uncovered it a couple years ago on a hard drive that I had lying around. And I'd like to send that out for some analysis. I didn't have a formal connection. I do now have a connection that I could use to get it to him. I didn't have it at the time, so I'll probably send it to him so we can get some analysis on that.
Sure. One last question I wanted to ask of you. You've obviously been in this for a while, since sort of the days when the internet stuff was really starting to take off. You saw the rise of social media.
Uh-huh.
I'm a younger guy. I've gotten into this in the past 4 or 5 years, so I'm obviously a product of the social media, the YouTube landscape. I was the armchair researcher in the 2000s, making little YouTube videos, that kind of thing. How do you think the field has changed, and in what ways? And is it a bit of a double-edged sword, or what do you think in your experience with the rise of the internet?
The thing with social media is it gives everybody an opinion and a place and an outlet to broadcast it. The problem is half those people haven't learned to shut up. And I think with any other field, you have a lot of people that haven't spent any time or have little to no education around the subject that make the most stink, and they just don't know what they're talking about. And I almost feel like Renee DeHinden at the point when I say that, because I now understand the frustration that some of those guys felt when younger guys like me came into the scene and made some stinks and noise. Like, we didn't do the background and the education
Right.
that we should have. We ignored a lot because we just didn't open a damn book. So my thing is, people is read books. Don't worry about so much what you're reading in chat groups and Facebook pages, because I tell you what, they're loaded with people that have all kinds of Bigfoot evidence that is absolutely not evidence, but they'll tell you it's evidence all day. The blob squatch has become
Oh yeah.
a almost its own culture. If you have to draw a red circle around it, it doesn't exist. It's just a figment of your imagination. Be 100% certain it's just a figment of your imagination. You shouldn't ever have to circle something for it to stand out to you to say that's proof. And if you are, that's bad proof. Would you, I guess, Alex, if I was on trial and the evidence that they were showing convicted me of a crime and you couldn't even make me out, and somebody just circled an image on the page and that was what put me away, I would be very disappointed. And we have to look at evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Could you say that that's actual legitimate evidence? And we have to raise our standards, because if we don't continuously raise our standards and raise the bar and educate ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any justice. We're not going to get anywhere. We're going to spend another 50 to 100 years at the same place we are right now. There's just going to be two different guys on a hologram having these conversations. It's it's just the way of the world. We have to do our due diligence to make ourselves better. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a forestry ranger. I'm not a biologist. I'm a sales manager, for crying out loud. I sell things and teach people how to sell things. But the one thing I'm great at is having a conversation.
Absolutely.
I love to talk to people and I love to understand people, because during those conversations, I find out what they need and I match them to those things that make their lives better. It's no different than when you're having a conversation with somebody who's had a Bigfoot encounter. I'm listening to them. They need something. They need somebody to listen to them. And if I have some information I could pass on to them or get them to make themselves more comfortable with me, they're going to share more with me. And that's my gift, the gift of gab, I guess. I try to use that appropriately and get information for not just myself, but for all of us, because I'm a big believer in the free share of information too. I think when we, lock stuff up and put it away, we're not doing a service to any other researchers. And I think that's another thing Pennsylvania has for it, is you have a lot of independent researchers, you have a lot of groups, but for the most part, there's a lot of free share of information that comes through. Um, and we're willing to sit down and talk with each other for the most part. And we do have some really great, productive, fruitful conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of Eric Altman recently uploading all that stuff to Facebook with
I just talked to him today.
amazing. I mean, it's a treasure trove of stuff that would have been lost to time because it's all pre-internet era stuff. So
Absolutely.
that free flow of
He
information is amazing.
hours a day, man. He's spending on that every day. Like, Eric and I are really close. He's my mentor. Like, and I don't, say that offhanded.
Such a nice guy.
I spent a lot of time with Eric. If it wasn't for Eric, I don't know if I'd have progressed as far as I have in the field. He's a pain in the ass sometimes, like we all can be, but I love the guy, and he has shown me a lot. And I think a lot of my open mindedness I have now come from years of him telling me to, don't dismiss things so much, and spending time with Stan and that same message. Don't be so
Right.
dismissive.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. One more question, just because I really like this question. We'll close out with that. Kevin Hamilton asks, I've heard several people claim that Bigfoot has a sense that helps it avoid infrared trail cameras or FLIR, but why would an animal evolve a sense for something that has not existed until very recently? I think that's a pretty good
Mm.
question.
That is, and we don't know that's the case. It's all supposition if you think
Yeah.
about it. We talk about infrasound. I don't, even our ability to detect infrasound hasn't been around for that long. Our ability to use it, it's happened in nature for eons, but our ability to detect it hasn't been that long. When you look at the time scheme of things, we think it could see these things. I don't think it does. I think, again, these devices emit some sort of frequency that can be heard. I don't think it's that they're seeing the light spectrum. I think they sense it through other ways. That's a great question. It really is a good one.
Yeah, I think people oftentimes overlook that, and there always are sort of a lot of excuses. Oh, this is why this happens or that. And I think it is important to have tough questions like that, because otherwise, how do you become more kind of in tune with your position? How do you kind of get yourself more entrenched in that in a way?
We don't know a lot. Let's be honest.
It's a guessing game. It's so much of it is.
Absolutely. We don't know a lot. We don't even know that this animal, aside from personal experiences and encounters and circumstantial evidence, we have no proof that this thing exists. So be very careful when people tell you these things do this. Steve Coles had another good friend of mine, over time, patterns of behavior, we can say this to be potentially, we could. I'm not willing to step out on that limb yet, but good for you, my
Right.
friend.
And that's what I love about this subject, is I think there's so many different people coming from different backgrounds or expertise, if you will. I mean, someone like Steve, who
Hmm.
investigating is what he does. Someone like yourself, you are a people person. You're out there talking to people. Someone like Jeff Meldrum, who's an academic trained in a very specific set of skills.
You like
I think
Steve?
there's
No,
yeah, right.
Dr. Mel.
There's so many different areas people come from, and obviously there are going to be those people that say, "Oh, I have all the answers. I have the absolute truth." And I think we need to be skeptical of those people, because so many of us are experiencing things we just don't know what's going on in the end. We maybe have an idea of it, but there's nothing really super concrete. And I think you do some fantastic work in Pennsylvania, and it's
Thank
been
you.
awesome talking with you and having you on, man. Really got to have you back on the
The
program.
same. Well, I'd love to. You just give me the time. I'll be here. I don't do these very often. Like I said, I do it for you because I consider you a friend and a kindred spirit, and I'll do whatever I can to help my friends and their work, because this is good stuff. I
Yeah,
enjoy it.
and I thank you again. And can you just tell people where they can listen to your program, Arcane
Mhm.
Radio, or if you want to talk about the Sasquatch experience, like where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me. You go to my Facebook at Sean Forker. I'm my name. I don't use any pseudonyms or handles. You want to find me, I'm available. Same thing at Twitter at Sean Forker. You can go to sasquatchexperience.com and find my show, The Sasquatch Experience. I did with Henry May. We relaunched that again. Like I said, we did that in 2005. We started, and we took a break, a 10-year break, but then we came back, and we got to find our steam again. We got to get that mojo back to get going. But once we do it, we're going to have some pretty good stuff out there. And you can't get enough information. I love talking about the subject uh, in a serious, sometimes not so serious way, but as long as we're out there trying to put forth the best product and the best information we can, that's all that matters. And give people an outlet where they can report things too. So, you can go to keystonebigfoot.com if you live in Pennsylvania and report your sightings, and we'll investigate it and try to get you matched up with an appropriate researcher in your area to get this to get some answers. We try to get 24 to 48 hour response time to your sighting reports.
Excellent. And I will link that as well as some of the other stuff you
Thank you.
mentioned down in the description. So if you guys want to check it out, thank you so much again. Thanks for the comments, guys. Thank you for everyone for your questions. Fantastic. We really look forward to next week with Les Odell. We obviously mentioned him a little bit, and we're going to talk about West Virginia, another one of those really weird and awesome states that I think has just so much strange stuff going on. And we'll definitely come back to Pennsylvania and have you on again. And thank you so much again. Hope you have a great night and stay safe, my friend.
You too. It's my pleasure. Thanks.
All right, guys. Have a good night.